Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are live on the air. My name is Max Jenenberg, and we're back with another guest. Joe Baldwin's back for the third time now on this show. And today we are ranking Pixar villains. Ness, really tough I talked to Joe about this before. We had a tough time coming together with this top 10 list, and we now have our list ready to go. To let you guys know, once again, to please hit that like button on this video and subscribe to Max Talks Movies, as well as putting in your questions for us to answer in a Q&A. After we're done our list, we'd love to hear from you guys, your thoughts on Pixar villains. Are there villains that we don't talk about that are in your top 10? Tell us all in the chat. And without further ado, we're going to do some honorable mentions first. Then we'll get into our top 10. So, Joe, talk about your honorable mentions, villains that you wanted to make your list but just couldn't.
I mean, I'd say my honorable mentions are less about that and more about just villains I want to talk about. Because there are a lot of Pixar villains when you really look at it. And like there are multiple villains per movie, but then there are some movies that don't have any real characters that are villains. That being said, my honorable mentions are in order. Sid/Al from Toy Story 1 and 2.
Okay.
And the reason I have them as honorable mentions is they're fun characters and I really enjoy them in their respective movies. But in the Toy Story movies, I feel like the humans are more forces of change, forces that create the plot versus the actual toys who are villains. So I do really enjoy, especially Al, because I mentioned on our top 10 Pixar list, Toy Story 2 is one of my favorites. They're both just so interesting because as humans we have to look at it through their eyes as well. Another Toy Story villain I have in my honorable mentions is the Emperor Zurg.
Yeah,
because he's not a very serious villain. He shows up for maybe a scene to fight fake Buzz Lightyear, who also is in my honorable mentions.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much played off for a gag, but I really enjoy it. And then my last honorable mention is the Underminer.
Yeah.
The most successful Pixar villain who shows up, robs a bank, and then leaves.
Yep.
He's the one who kept us on our toes for, I believe, 14 years as the Incredibles cliffhanger, and I thought I should give him a little shout out here. Anyway, those are my honorable mentions.
I have two honorable mentions. One is I was fighting with to get on my list. So it goes from number 12 to 11, these ones. Jackson Storm from Cars 3 is a character that I really enjoyed. I watched Cars 3 for the second time 2 nights ago. While he's not really in the movie, I think the fact that he's all about technology and it's Armie Hammer. So I think Jackson Storm's a fun character. And the one that was really fighting to get on the list, it might change when I watch this movie tonight, and that's Gabby from Toy Story 4, was a character that I never felt that emotional investment in any of the Toy Story villains, but you felt emotion when she was kind of left behind by children in the store. And her motive is very clear, and the ending is super, super satisfying for that character. But I just couldn't fit that on the list. So now let's get into our top 10 Pixar villains. Joe, start us off with your number 10.
All right. I do want to just say the Gabby scene is very emotional, but as a character, I love Gabby. As a villain, I feel like she's so-so.
Yeah.
But that was actually my number 10 before I changed my list around. My number 10 now is Otto from WALL-E, who is one of the more menacing villains. He's an artificial intelligence. There's something very cold about him. Again, the movie WALL-E, it's a beautiful movie, but the world it takes place in genuinely terrifies me. So Otto being in control and having so much power over the ship is really scary. He's kind of a terrifying villain. And the battle between the captain and Otto for control over the ship is a really powerful scene. But I think so much of what I liked about WALL-E is not about the humans and the axiom problems, but more about the artistry of WALL-E and Eve's story together, which which is what really draws me to the movie. So yeah, Otto's my number 10.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Otto's a very interesting character because he's fully just, he's not a human character. He's really not the human character in the film that you're going against. My number 10, I'm not sure if it's in a lot of people's top 10s, but I'm going to go with it. And that is Chick Hicks from Cars 1. Was a character that I really forgot was in the movie, just forgot about him. And then I rewatched Cars, my big Pixar binge as of late. And I love Chick Hicks. He steals basically every scene that he's in. And yes, I am a Michael Keaton super fan, but still, I think Chick Hicks has amazing dialogue, amazing lines to say to Lightning. He's kind of the complete polar opposite of Lightning. He finishes in second every race, and his gimmick of Kachinga and Thunder is completely the opposite of Lightning, which makes me crack up every time he says that in the first one. And the idea that he's just the runner-up and he actually wins the Piston Cup at the end is also super satisfying for his cameo in Cars 3, how he becomes this big analyst because he won that Piston Cup. So I really enjoyed Chick Hicks, even though I think Cars 1 is a okay to solid movie. I think Chick Hicks, while not really in the movie when he's in it, I love Chick Hicks, and I think he's one of the standouts of that first Cars movie. Joe, do you want to move on to number 9, or do you want to add on to that point?
I mean, Chick Hicks, I was not expecting to make a top 10 list, but yeah. I mean, him being so unlikable is part of what makes him a pretty great villain. I just really don't like him. Yeah. My number 9 is Stinky Pete from Toy Story 2. I believe the first twist villain in Pixar. Mm-hmm. His sort of reveal at the end is great. You really don't suspect him much because you're so much more focused on Woody and his changing ideas, and you don't really see the. I mean, I didn't see it coming, but again, I watched this when I was like very young. Anyway, yeah, so he's sort of a mentor. He's the one who convinces Woody to stay with them in the good guy position. He's acting as a mentor to Woody, and then and then the turn really shifts his perspective. And I think his manipulation of all the events really lines up. The reason he's so far back on my list, because I love Toy Story 2, is just because you don't get a lot of him. Like, Toy Story 2 has a lot of villains, but for different parts of the movie. So Stinky Pete is the villain for the end. Yeah. But because you don't get a lot of him being evil, I will say the fight that takes place on the conveyor belts in the airport is great, but it's not enough to get him further up my list. So Stinky Pete at number 9. Yeah.
I see your point, and I like that you also mentioned Al too. I think that movie has just so many good things going against the toys in that movie. And did you add in your point that did you think the twist was coming? Like, did you think he would be the villain overall in the movie the first time you saw it?
This is, again, the first time I saw it was when I was 5 years old, and I didn't have a lot of analytical prowess. So yeah, I was surprised, but I was also 5. But I still appreciate the twist every time I see it on a rewatch. It is a very great character moment. It kind of it ups the suspense when Stinky Pete blocks Woody from exiting. Mm-hmm. I think it's just a great moment.
Yes, and Ahmad, we are live. This is not pre-recorded. We are live. My number 9 is Anton Ego from Ratatouille. He really, and I'll just also say this in my pick, Skinner is not in my top 10. I think Skinner for me is the worst part of Ratatouille. Especially rewatching it, I really couldn't stand Skinner. But Ego is a character who's super fascinating. He turned out to be the reason why Gusteau's kind of collapsed. It was kind of, once he did that review, it was kind of the end of Gusteau's restaurant being that high profile restaurant. Then Gusteau's dead. So he kind of made a huge impact on that business. And you know how great he is because one review can make them super popular, or one review could kill a restaurant. And that's why he's such a powerful villain, is because he really put everyone in a tough situation, the opening of Ratatouille, that the necessity of that restaurant, Gusteau's, being important in France. And then the fact that he enjoys the Ratatouille, even though a rat made it, was, again, and Joe and I definitely talked about this on our Pixar ranking, that was the most emotional part of the whole film. Ego eating that Ratatouille, then going back to his childhood, hits home for, I think, everyone. There's always that thing that takes you back to your childhood, and for him, it was just Ratatouille, and that was truly an amazing scene. But yeah, he really isn't a villain. He isn't in the movie a lot. He maybe gets 2 scenes of being an actual villain in the film, but I really enjoy him, and I do think he's the best villain in this movie, more than Skinner, in my opinion. Joe, do you want to move into your number 8 here?
I would love to. My number 8 is Charles Muntz from Up. I think Charles Muntz is a very interesting villain because he is Carl's hero. He is, when they meet for the first time, again, Charles Muntz is a twist villain, which is a very common thing in Pixar movies. But when they first meet, Carl is enthralled. He's amazed. This is his hero. This is the man who's inspired this decision for the entire movie that he made to take his house to to Paradise Falls. But yeah, his welcoming of Carl, he really appreciates the praise. But then when he gets the idea in his head that Carl is after his bird, he turns, it's a very interesting depiction of how obsession can change someone from who they are. I really, and Up is a fantastic movie, and I did enjoy Charles Muntz as well as his talking dogs, including Alpha, who was maybe going to be one of my honorable mentions, but I decided against it. Yeah. He's just a hilarious character. Yeah, I think my point about Charles Muntz is similar to my point about Stinky Pete. You don't get a lot of him, and other than the twist where he slowly reveals how twisted his obsession has made him. After that, it really is he's just trying to kill them, and that's not always the most interesting. Carl has more of a relationship to him than he has a relationship to Carl. Although he does exploit the house as Carl's weakness, which I really do appreciate. Yeah, I think he's a great villain. He's just not top 5 material.
And I'll add into your point. Charles Muntz is not in my top 10. I want to talk to you about it. Why, too, Joe? You made a great point, and that's why he's such a great villain for me. Like when I was rewatching Up the other day, just the fact that he's the one who really brought our romance together. Carl and Ellie were brought together because of Muntz, because they both love Muntz. But for me, it's just his character got a little too over the top and ridiculous, in my opinion, when he became an actual villain in the movie. The twist I love, but then there he gets, flying dogs or flying planes, and I hated that part.
You don't like the dogs flying planes? You don't like the literal dog fight?
But for me, in my opinion, I thought the movie was great when it was taking itself so seriously. And then when it goes off the rails like that, it just didn't really mix with that's my main issue with Up. But in my opinion, yeah, I agree. Muntz is for such an important character, one of the more personal characters to our leads in a Pixar movie. My number 8 is a movie that I actually just watched for the first time 2 nights ago. The only Pixar movie that I didn't watch, and that was Ernesto de la Cruz from Coco, is my number 8. Yes, I missed Coco when it came out in theaters. I said, I don't know why I didn't check it out. And now I have checked it out. And I do love this movie. And I really like Ernesto de la Cruz. Talking about personal connection to our hero, very similar to Charles Muntz in the fact that our lead never actually met him until he turned bad. We're told throughout the whole movie that Miguel's, and we're going to spoil movies here, so you got to understand that Miguel's grandfather the whole time he thought was Ernesto de la Cruz. And that twist worked. My main issue with the movie, with Ernesto de la Cruz as well as the movie, is that you can kind of see the twist coming a mile away. really, and I haven't seen the movie. I didn't know any of the twists. I just saw him pop up on TV. I was like, he's going to be the bad guy. And it's Ben Bratt voicing him. So I really assumed that. But his character has a really cool motive. The fact that he basically took all of Hector's lyrics and used them into his own, and then he poisoned Hector. And that made Hector a bad person in his family. It was truly heartbreaking to understand that twist. Of basically, the main really good twist was that Hector became what we found out was Miguel's great-grandfather, and that really worked. So I think that twist worked more than the Ernesto de la Cruz villain twist, but the fact that he's this big of a superstar with that great of a motive of, I mean, he tried to kill Miguel and Hector multiple times. He's also just a mega superstar, not just in the human world, but in the Day of the Dead stuff. So I think his character is super important and probably the most important character, honestly, in the film. Do you agree, or do you want to move on to number 7?
I want to talk about Ernesto de la Cruz because I considered him, but for me, I think recency bias may play a little bit in this, which is I think we chose very similar characters for our number 8, Charles Muntz and Ernesto de la Cruz. Ernesto definitely has more of an impact on the overall story. Like Miguel actually thinks he's related to him. But I think Coco, I really enjoyed the movie. It just never sticks out to me when I'm thinking of my Pixar rankings. Like if you go back to the Pixar top 10 list, Coco doesn't make it for me.
Before you go, I also want to bring up my point too. I watched Coco, so that moved into my number 11 slot. By the way, on Pixar, it just leaped onward. So it's my number 11. So it just missed my top 10. I really did love that movie. Your number 7, Joe?
My number 7 is Anton Ego, just a couple slots above your place above him.
Yes.
I love his character. Anton Ego, his review at the end of Gusteau's really made the movie for me. I mean, there are a lot of other excellent details. Like all of the other characters are great. Remy, it's just, but Anton Ego's review where he sort of has his change of heart, where he reveals to everyone how, where he talks about how great the food is and how it's changed his perception. That was such a powerful moment for me that's what really brought Ratatouille up as a movie. But I do have to agree with you. Anton Ego, I love as a character more than I love him as a villain. So I brought him up further than I switched him around a couple of times. He is sort of this menacing presence throughout the movie, which is a very interesting. But the first time he really interacts with the characters is he changes his mind. He's redeemed pretty quickly. And Chef Skinner is more of the antagonist throughout.
Agreed.
And I didn't even remember him until I was looking at lists when I was trying to make this one, and I was like, oh, that's right, that little
Skinner.
Anyway, I really do love Anton Ego's character, his the emotional flashback, his review. It's just his actual villainy throughout the movie is pretty limited. But I still love him, so he makes my number 7.
Yeah. My number 7 is Waternoose from Monsters, Inc. There's 2 villains in Monsters, Inc. I'll talk to the other one later in this video, but here, Waternoose, for me, actually had one of the better Pixar twists, that he actually is the big bad of it. But what they really nail Monsters, Inc. is the fact that he still really cares for Sully the whole time. He really is Sully's father figure throughout the whole movie. And once Mike and Sully give the baby to Waternoose, he already knows how disappointed he is because he has to do something to his son, basically, in Sully. And that continued throughout the whole movie. He's so disappointed that Sully and Mike, well, really Sully, is in this situation in the third act. And his character is a really interesting character. His motives are very clear because he's a business guy. I mean, this thing wasn't an issue until he really didn't become a villain until Boo becomes known in the world. Once she transitions in, I mean, he's just a business guy, a rich guy who wants Monsters Incorporated to continue on. But he's an extremist. He banishes Sully and Mike, and he tries to kill Boo towards that third act. So Waternoose is a great character, great voice acting, and a really good twist that I actually didn't see coming the first couple times watching that film. Your number 6, Joe.
My number 6 is Hopper from A Bug's Life.
Yeah.
And I just recently watched A Bug's Life for the first time a couple of weeks ago. So I don't have the same nostalgia for Hopper as I do for certain other characters, but just on a first watch, I really did think he was a great villain, because there's certain parts for a lot of the movie where he's kind of generic. He's the antagonist. He's terrorizing the ants. But there's one scene that I think really elevates him as a villain, which is when all of the grasshoppers are at their home base.
Yep.
They're celebrating, they're having a feast, and someone brings up the idea as like, you know what, we're set. We have a lot of food. Let's just tell Hopper that we don't need to go back for the ants for more food. We're fine. And Hopper's response is by making a statement, which is, we're fine, but the ants are more powerful than us. They're more numerous. They have the numbers advantage against us. And if they realize that, then our reign of power is over. So it's not just this menacing, generic figure. He actually understands what's going on. He knows that if the ants try to stand against him, they could succeed. So his fear-mongering really comes from a place of strategy. That, and also he has a very satisfying, his weakness is the bird, and they take advantage of that. I think it's a simple story, but it really works. His death is also very satisfying, which is a very key if you don't like them, you have to be satisfied with how the heroes take care of him, because it's not the heroes defeat him necessarily, it's he defeats himself, which is often something that really works. Like I said, I think he doesn't make it further up my list just because it's a newer character for me. So he makes my...
My number 6 is Sid from the first Toy Story, which was Joe's honorable mention. I love this character. Now, in the first, I rewatched it the other day. It feels like his character was pretty one-note and generic in really the first act. He just blows up toys. That's his fun. But really, his character becomes so much more expanded and complex is when they go into his house. Just his family as a whole too. What he does to his sister. He seems like a bully, and then at the end, he's the scaredy cat. The sister scares away Sid at the end of the movie. That's one of the more satisfying moments in a Pixar movie. The ending of all the toys, basically, who were basically messed up by Sid coming over and taking over, and he believes that they were all talking, but no one else is going to believe that. So Sid looks like a total scaredy cat, and that ending is super satisfying. It's exactly what the movie needed to happen. And it's a very powerful ending as well for Sid's character, who we then see cameo as a truck driver in 3, which was also a very satisfying thing that makes a lot of sense. So for me, Sid's a great opening villain. Is he the strongest villain in Toy Story? I don't think so, but I think he's a great way to kick off Pixar and to kick off Toy Story. Before we get into our top 5, guys, we're almost at the end of our list, so please put in questions for a Q&A. We'll be here as long as you want us here. Noon is the latest. So put in your questions about Pixar villains only, okay? We're not going to go super off topic. And if you're joining us for the first time, please hit that subscribe button and like this video. Joe, move into your top 5, please.
I do want to say one more point about Sid, if you'll let me, which is I think all of those points are great. And just to talk again about why he's in my honorable mention, it is because a lot of the humans in Toy Stories, they just don't have the same relationship with the heroes, with the toys, because they think they are just toys. So it's sort of a one-way relationship. But talking about the relationship between the hero and the villain, my number 5 is Randall from Monsters Inc. I think Randall is a great villain, but he's also a well-designed villain. He's not bulky, he's not strong. He's sort of, he has his camouflage. He's slick. He moves around. He makes invisibility look intimidating, which is a very interesting idea because, invisibility is the lack of presence and intimidation is presence in itself. I think he's really just truly evil. He hates everyone. He treats everyone terribly. He's a villain you love to hate. And I'm not really considering Monsters University right now.
Yes,
just because I haven't watched it in ages.
Yes.
But in Monsters Inc., he's such a menacing figure, and also the heroes don't realize how evil he really is for a long time. So there is this direct competition with Sully, but then also like a need. He actually wants to help society by creating technology that will end the power shortage.
Yeah.
So he's not exactly relatable. He's definitely doing everything out of his own self-interest. But there are just certain elements of his character that are really compelling. And again, he's a character you love to hate. He truly is evil. Yeah.
Randall's a great character. My number 5 is Stinky Pete, the prospector from Toy Story 2. Yeah, very high up. I was shocked actually how high up I had him. But as Joe said, the twist works. And not just because the twist works, but you really understand where he's coming from. He's not... he's probably the villain that makes the most sense on where he's coming from. Out of all of that group of toys, he's the one that is the villain. I mean, he doesn't get played with that often because he's the villain. And now he has a chance of basically being able to play with kids or just stand in exhibits for the rest of his life, which for him is the best thing that could happen. Because in that group, they always play with Woody and Jesse, but not really with Stinky. So I think that his character is insanely not relatable, but you understand where his character's coming from. You didn't really see coming the extremist vibe of him. The fact that Woody agreed, and the twist that I really forgot about until I rewatched it the other week, that he's the one who turned on the TV when Woody was trying to do that. That was a really clever twist because you really thought the whole movie it was Jesse who did that, but it was actually the prospector. So I think the prospector his ending is hilarious. The fact now he goes with a Barbie after another Barbie doll. I feels like that's what it was at the end of the movie. And that was hilarious. So he basically is the complete opposite of what he wanted. So that's what good villains have to end off. And that's why Stinky Pete's in my top 5, Joe.
I understand that completely. I had him in a couple different positions, but I eventually settled on 9. But for 4, my 4 is Waternoose.
Yeah.
I put him and Randall very close because again, they're linked. Randall is the enforcer, and Waternoose is sort of the brains behind the operation. I do have Waternoose higher than Randall because I think his twist works really well. He's not the villain for a long time, and in fact, he has a great relationship with Sully. He's a father figure, and throughout the movie, it's really well laid out how he would be the villain, which is he's running a corporation just going under. The government keeps breaking in, shutting them down, and that would drive him to seek out something else that would keep him in business. So I think you mentioned it, the moment where he is truly sorry in having to banish Sully because he knows that Sully's trying to do the right thing, but he needs this to work. I think that's just his relationship with Sully is a little bit more powerful than Randall's rivalry with him, and that's why I have him higher than Randall. But I wanted to put them wherever they were going to be. It was going to be Randall then Waternoose because I think they're so connected in their plan, which is creating a better source of energy for the monster world. I just think that Waternoose's reasoning behind it is a lot more relatable and he's a likable character for a really long time. So when he does turn, you really feel it, as opposed to Randall, who's, always evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my number 4.
It's a good point. It's a good point. I'm moving my number 4, and that is, I'm not trying to spoil Joe's list, but I think this is his number 1, and that is Syndrome from Incredibles. Is coming in at number 4. Now, yes, some people, yes. I definitely, but this 4 for me, they're all like 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. Like, they're all just amazing characters, in my opinion, my next 4 coming up. But Syndrome for me works amazingly. I love Syndrome. The voice work, again, is great. His motive is great. Again, now, the reason why he's number 4 and not above is that he's a very familiar villain, a villain who looks up to our hero, gets turned down by our hero, and then turns out to be a villain. We've seen that a million times in movies. Now, do I think Syndrome's the best out of those type of villains? Yes. But that still it still is a very familiar villain that we've seen before, pretty much saturated in the last 20 years in superhero films, especially, Riddler in Batman Forever, Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2, and Killian in Iron Man 3 all have the same different type of plot. But Syndrome works because he actually wants to be the hero at the end of the day. Compared to all those guys, all those different types of villains want to be super villains. Syndrome wants to be the hero of the story. That's why he created those big monsters. That's why at the end of the movie, he knows how to take him down so he can look like the hero, which is a clever way for Syndrome. But yeah, and his death was very comedic, especially coming back to Edna talking about how you should never wear a cape, and that is the ending of Syndrome. But we don't really get Syndrome until midway through the second act. He's just Buddy in the first act. So it took a little while to get into Syndrome, but when he's on, Syndrome is on. And I know I just spoiled Joe's, but I assume that's Joe's based on our.
I don't know what you're talking about, Max.
Our Pixar rankings.
You didn't spoil my list at all.
Okay. Top 3 here. This is where it gets interesting. Joe, your number 3 is?
All right. My number 3 is Lotso. And, I'm not always the biggest fan of Lotso, but when I thought about it, he is a great villain.
Yeah.
He does have this sort of, there are a couple other characters higher on or lower on my list that have the same thing, but he starts out as nice. He starts out as welcoming to the heroes, but he truly is evil. But the way he does it is in sort of a way where he's saying, "Oh, it's for your own good." I also think he's a mob boss, basically, which is not always there are a couple different Pixar villains who have that sort of idea. I think Hopper is also kind of a mob boss, but Lotso commands such respect from everyone else that you don't even need to know that he's really the villain until a certain point through the movie, because the way he talks, he still justifies his actions very well throughout, I'd say, the first half of the movie. When Buzz approaches him, when the toys approach him about the room they're in, he kind of responds and he keeps a level tone. He's like, "Well, somebody has to do it." And when Buzz approaches him alone, he says, "Well, yeah, you're an exception. You can join our room." And then when Buzz tries to bring everyone else in, that's when Lotso really reveals his villainy. I think his backstory is also very tragic. There are a lot of other toys that have similar backstories, but they all react in different ways. So I'd say Lotso sort of has a little bit of Jesse's tragedy, but with even more insult to injury because he was replaced. And him snapping really brings everyone down with him. It brings the Chuckles, I believe it's Chuckles, and Big Baby down with him. I think he's just got such a power over the entire story without actually doing much, because his influence on all of the other characters is felt so heavily. And of course, again, he's a villain you love to hate, because in the moment where the heroes actually spare him, he betrays their trust once again, and then gets his comeuppance in being tied to the front of a garbage truck. I don't really know what else to say about Lotso. I think he is, out of the Toy Story toy villains, as much as I love Stinky Pete, I think he's just much more powerful.
Yeah.
So that's why he makes my number 3.
Yeah. My number 3 is a character that Joe just talked about, and that is Randall Boggs. Monsters, Inc. / University. Wasn't really a villain in University. In Inc., well, because Joe didn't want to talk about, I'll talk about in University, basically, Randall is just happens to be Mike's roommate, who, because he went, now I love Randall in the early part of University, but then when he wants to join War Omega War, he just becomes a villain all of a sudden. So that didn't really make a lot of sense. But then when you get to Inc., he is truly the best villain, in my opinion, in that movie, because he scares Mike the whole movie. Every time Randall pops up, Mike gets scared. And that's something that we don't really see from our characters, just being that afraid of a villain every time they pop on screen, because Randall obviously disappears a lot. So I think that I'll talk about that later, Harvey. But who was the Monsters University villain? Keep putting in your questions, though. I think Randall aligning himself with Water News was also really clever, because Water News needed that person who needed that type of slick person to infiltrate and take the kid. And Randall, his relationship with Randall's, I don't know what you call it, the person who helps him with the doors and stuff, that relationship was really funny. And Randall trying to get extra points. He just cares about being the scare record over Sully, period. That's what he
Fungus. Fungus is the guy who helps him with the doors.
Yes, Fungus.
I just watched the movie.
Yeah, so the villain in Monsters University was Johnny Worthington, I believe is his name. He was the head of War Omega Roar, I guess. There really isn't an overlying villain. Dean Hardscrabble is kind of the villain, because she kind of wants Mike out of Monsters University, but at the end she kind of respects Mike at the end. So it's a mix of Johnny Worthington and Dean Hardscrabble in Monsters University. Joe, you're number 2.
Oh man, I've been waiting to get to this one.
Yeah,
this one is probably my most controversial pick, so I'm going to do a lot of explaining. My number 2 Pixar villain is Joy from Inside Out.
What?
Okay, so hear me out on this. I think Joy is a fantastic villain because you don't think she's a villain. Okay. She's wrong. Throughout the movie, she is the one who's creating the problems. She's likable enough throughout the movie. Amy Poehler's performance as Joy is brilliant. And I'm not saying that Joy is an inherently evil character. I'm just saying what she does is the antithesis of what we learn in the end. Her treatment of sadness is bordering on I don't even know what. It's not great. It's she thinks she's right, which is a classic villain move. She thinks in making Riley feel happy is the best option. And slowly throughout the movie realizes that sadness is actually important. Yeah. She kind of passively aggressively bullies sadness in the entire movie until you realize that sadness is a key emotion, is really important in emotional health. And the reason I have Joy as my number 2 is just because personally, I love this interpretation of it, and I thought that it would be hilarious. But I wanted to talk about Inside Out, and Inside Out doesn't really have a villain unless you consider what Joy does as the villain. Interesting. I thought I was going to be more.
That's great. I've never even heard that take before, so I'm all open to it. And
I mean, I had a hard time coming up with my top 5. So this was that's a good point. Anyway, I think just her journey, Joy's journey to realizing she's wrong, is not always something we get out of our heroes. And just in order to make this list, out of our villains. So her redemption is great, but there are many moments where like she leaves sadness behind in order to return the core memories. She never tries to understand sadness, and then when she does, it's such a powerful moment. Probably one of the best in the entire movie.
Yes.
I mean, yeah.
Great point. Great point.
I really just like this take, and I think Joy is such a great character that I'm willing to overlook the part of it, which is she's supposed to be the hero, which is what makes her such a great villain, is that you're on her side until you're not.
Yep. My number 2 is a character that Joe talked about earlier, but he's way up for me, and that's Hopper from A Bug's Life is my number 2. Now, as Joe said, Joe is very recent on the A Bug's Life train, in my opinion. I'm a mega Bug's Life fan, and just because I've watched it a lot of times since I was a little kid, and I have crazy amounts of nostalgia for it. And Hopper, for me, is easily the best part of A Bug's Life. Now, yes, we're not going to talk about the person who voiced him. I'm just talking about the character here, because we know Kevin Spacey voiced him. But I think Hopper is such a fascinating villain. I get chills every time I watch the movie when he comes onto the screen for the first time, when all the grasshoppers come down, and Hopper he doesn't give a crap what's going on. It's all about him. He makes himself known. And Joe actually explained it perfectly. The scene in the sombrero, where he basically explains that the bugs altogether are stronger than the grasshoppers. It's a great point, and it's a thing that I actually never thought of when I watched that movie, was that actually being the reason why the bugs win. And the fact that Hopper basically knows the weakness of the grasshoppers. He understands what it's going to take for the grasshoppers to get their food on time and make sure he puts the bugs in place. But really, it was Dot who saved the day, really giving faith to everyone. But I think Hopper is such a strong villain. Again, such a satisfying conclusion to his character. The fact that he's killed by baby birds was hilarious. But his character throughout the movie is super intimidating. You understand, and just his size alone, you understand why he thinks he has so much power over Flick and over the colony so easily. Hopper is number 2. I think we know each other's number 1. Joe, kick us off with your number 1.
In the words of the great Megamind, the difference between a villain and a supervillain is presentation. And no one exemplifies this better than Syndrome. That's right. Syndrome is my number 1. Max had it absolutely correct. I love Syndrome, and it shouldn't be much of a shock, as Incredibles is my number 1 Pixar movie. Yep. But he's so great, and I think there are several points that I disagree with Max on about Syndrome, which is him showing up for only half of the movie. It really works because you get Buddy Pine in the beginning, which is already an introduction to the character that a lot of villains don't get. They don't get that introduction alongside the hero. And then when he arrives, one of the best moments of the movie is when he shows up and uses the Omnidroid to beat up Mr. Incredible. It's such a great moment, especially when he reveals that he's Mr. Incredible's biggest fan. If Stinky Pete is the first twist villain, the one who started the formula, Syndrome is the best. I know there are several other villains and other types of movies that maybe have the same relationship with being scorned by the hero. But I mean, a lot of the villains you listed as examples are not.
No, I agree with you on that point. They're
not great villains.
Yeah.
I think Syndrome does it so well. Iron Man 3 copied it from Syndrome. His point about wanting to be the superhero, he really walks the line. He embodies every excellent trope of a supervillain while also subverting all of them. He is the supervillain, and he admits to being the supervillain, but he also wants to be the hero. I mean, even he has some sick hair. But even his name is extremely well thought out, because the concept of creating problems in order for you to swoop in and save the day, and be regarded as a hero, is called hero syndrome. It's I think it's a great idea, especially just every time he's on screen. He has such a presence, especially his line of giving his inventions to the public in order to make everyone super. And when everyone's super, no one will be, which is the perfect way to spite someone he hates so much, because that person thinks they're so much better than everyone else, in order just making everyone equal. I love Syndrome as a villain. I could talk about him more, but I feel like I've made my point. Syndrome is my number one Pixar villain.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I still, as I said, my top 4 was kind of 1A, 1B. Like, they're all perfect villains, in my opinion. Just some I have more nostalgia for and like better. So my number 1 is easy. And Joe, do you know who it is? Do you know who my number 1
have a feeling, but I don't want to guess on air.
All right, so my number 1 is Lotso from Toy Story.
There it is.
3. Very easy. Easily the best villain, in my opinion, in the Toy Story franchise and in Pixar, because, as Joe said, he was actually replaced by his owner. We keep talking about in the first 2 Toy Stories how the toys keep getting forgotten about, but we never really got the perspective of a toy that gets lost, but when it comes back, sees its own toy, replacing it. We kind of saw a hint of that when Buzz sees all of the Buzzes in 2, but we never really feel that emotion of Buzz ever feeling. We never got the feeling that Buzz was going to get actually replaced in 2. Here, it's super personal, and you get why Lotso becomes mad, because he actually gets replaced, because it's the same bear. Lotso also running Sunnyside was brilliant. He goes from loving the toys to, when Buzz asks for one thing to change, that's not good enough for Lotso. And then once he flips Buzz's switch to being, actual Buzz Lightyear, is also really good stuff. And what I really loved about the movie that I really just picked up on when I watched it last week, and that was the fact that at the end, where we feel like the toys are going to die, Woody saves Lotso twice, but Lotso doesn't really care. They never redeem Lotso at all. Even when Woody says, hit the switch, Lotso forgets about the toys. He just leaves. And that's why the movie for me is super special, is that Lotso never gets redeemed. He continues to be a bad guy. Even though our heroes are nice people and they want to save him, he doesn't really care about them. So, and he does get his retribution. He's on the front of the truck to end that movie. But for me, the fact that that was extra beautifulness, that he didn't hit that button. He didn't save our heroes. And I was so worried that he was going to be redeemed, but he wasn't. That's why, for me, easily, Lotso is the number 1 villain, in my opinion. So we're at that point where we're at 12 minutes left, and we have a Q&A. So, guys, put in your Pixar villain questions. Let's talk Pixar villains. We missed a lot. I mean, for example, we didn't talk about definitely some bad villains like Screenslaver and Miles Axelrod. And, I can think Mordu is a villain who we did not talk about. We didn't talk about Monsters University. I'm trying to think who else we didn't talk about. We talked about Ernesto de la Cruz. I'm really trying to think here. Pixar villains who we did not talk about. We didn't talk about. I referenced Jackson Storm. Does Bruce count as a villain in Nemo? Does he?
I don't think so. We didn't mention Darla.
We didn't mention
Darla, the dentist.
Darla, who definitely is a villain in that movie. We didn't talk about, I forgot the name of the villain in The Good Dinosaur, the birds that come in. Who's the worst Pixar villain? Wow. Okay. Worst Pixar villain. Joe, do you have one in mind?
I'm trying not to be hasty about this. You brought up the birds, the pterodactyls and The Good Dinosaur.
Yeah.
I've mentioned my feelings about The Good Dinosaur. I'm not a fan of that movie.
It's Thunderclap. I just saw it. Thunderclap
Okay.
is the villain. So worst villain. For me, it's really tough. I would say for me, it's between Miles Axelrod in Cars 2, who basically plays the we find out he basically created the set of races that Lightning does, the Grand Prix basically in Cars 2. We find out that he was actually the one who was destroying all of the cars' gas and stuff. So he was super weak because and the fact that Mater found out, no one knew that he was the villain, but somehow Mater knew. It didn't really make a lot of sense. And I would also say that Thunderclap. Mordu was actually better than I thought. Remembered the fact that Mordu was just he was actually one of the kings in Brave, and he turned into what the mom was about to turn into at the end of Brave.
I was actually going to comment and say I think Mordu is my least favorite because,
yeah,
I mean, he's just a bear, right? That's it.
Yep.
He has backstory, but he doesn't do anything other than just fight the mom as a bear.
Yep. No, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
But I was just I didn't think it was rushed. How about this one, Joe? Which villain do you relate to the most, and which villain does the other guy remind you of the most?
Okay.
Joe, do you want to go first?
Give me a second. I'm trying to think of other ones.
Other villains that basically who do we relate, like, as yourself? Who do you see yourself as one of the Pixar villains, and who do you see me as one of the Pixar villains? Basically is the question.
I mean, I'm going to say Syndrome because I feel like if a superhero rejected me,
for you,
I might not take it very well.
So your Syndrome is what you're saying.
I mean, I think, let's see. I'm looking at any other more relatable.
Right. If you're Syndrome, then who do you think I am?
I'm tempted to say Randall. I don't know. I feel like
it's a good point. I mean,
there may be certain people that that you knew in high school that you might not appreciate being at your job and showing you up all the time. That's
so I'll think of mine and Joe's. So
Harvey, I do not have an issue with bears. I love bears. My problem is with a bear being the villain.
I'm trying to think. Who would I be as a villain? Well, if you're counting Joy as a villain, then I would consider myself.
Are you counting Joy as a villain? I'm counting Joy as a villain.
I don't think Joy is a villain, but you, well, I don't know. Damn it.
I mean, if we are saying Joy's a villain, I mean,
I think I would be Joy.
Most relatable. Yeah, you're supposed to be on her side.
Yeah, so I would probably be Joy. Joe. Who would Joe be? Syndrome is a good one. Joe. Trying to think here. Wow, this is because I know Ty's normally on the show too. I would think Ty would be Chick Hicks.
Of course.
Yeah, so I think we both agree Ty is Chick Hicks, but I mean not Randall for you. I think we could count Bruce and Nemo. I think you're Bruce.
I'm Bruce?
Yeah, I think it would be hilarious. I think Bruce is.
Am I Bruce when he's crazed by blood, or am I Bruce when he's
a nice guy? When he's like when he's doing the when the what do you call it? When he's doing the therapy thing with the two other sharks. Yeah, so that's what I'll say. You guys tell us, who do you think we are as Pixar villains? Come on, keep asking us. I'm trying to think of other villains. Well, I'll also talk about this. So Otto was your number 10, and I didn't even have Otto as an honorable mention. And for me, I think Otto is, my opinion, the worst part of WALL-E. Because the idea of the president of the United States basically sending a message to the captain saying that you guys can come to Earth when you get a plant. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Otto's like, actually, I got a secret message just to me saying we shouldn't be going back to Earth. And it didn't really make a lot of sense at all for me. Like, I don't know why you would keep it, why he wouldn't send it to the captain. Even though the captain, as we can see, is pretty much everyone else on the ship. But Otto is a character that I didn't really see why he needed to be the big bad of the movie. in my opinion.
I agree with you. Otto is arguably the worst part of that movie, but WALL-E is a fantastic movie. So the worst part of WALL-E is still.
Well, I don't think it's fantastic.
I mean, honestly, now that you bring up Ernesto de la Cruz, I might rewatch Coco because that might beat out Otto. I mean, I didn't have a lot to say about Otto. I watched WALL-E recently. I was like, it's an engaging fight scene. You know, the captain fighting against Otto. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
If Otto had a little bit more personality, that might have made it better. But yeah,
Chilling movies
of villains for each villain.
Chilling Movies, who thank you for coming, Chilling. Hey, what's up, Max and Joe? I know that Inside Out didn't have a villain, thank God. But if it did, who would you think of it? I think you came in too late because Joe.
We didn't watch the rest of the stream.
On Joe's number 2 villain, he has Joy from Inside Out as the villain. Do you want to do a quick recap of what?
Okay. Again? So maybe I can say it a little better than I did the first time. Joy is my number 2 villain because I think it's such an interesting. If you look at Joy as the villain, she is the one who's keeping Sadness away from the control center. She's the one who's keeping Riley in sort of this state of emotional turmoil, trying to be happy but not being happy. So I think I agree. Inside Out doesn't have a true villain, someone who's mean and trying to stop the hero from doing something. I'm just saying that Joy's perception of herself being correct hurts those around her. Like her perception of I need to make Riley happy sort of hurts Sadness. Like, you know, and Sadness is kind of a pushover and sort of takes it throughout the entire movie. And then when Joy's journey is the center of it, and when she realizes she's wrong, she's redeemed. I'm trying to think of better ways to say this. I think it's a
good point. I also think Jangles, I guess, is the closest thing to a villain we got in the movie, but I still think he's not a villain. Your point's great because Joy doesn't understand that sadness is a very important piece to what a human needs. And because she doesn't understand that, she keeps shoving sadness to the side, which, as Joe said earlier, is very passive-aggressive. She even puts her in a circle. She doesn't believe that sadness can do anything. But when she realizes that when she's lost, she says, what would sadness do? And she figures her way out. That's when she knows sadness is a person to trust and not someone who's depressing. Sadness isn't a bad thing. It's just a lesson that she didn't know yet. It was a lesson that she needed to learn to fully be Joy, honestly.
And again, I wanted to include this on my list just because I really love Inside Out and I love talking about Inside Out. And I think through a certain lens, the journey of Inside Out can look like a villain coming to the realization that they're wrong.
Yes. Max could be Anton Ego because he's a reviewer. Now, the reason why I didn't want to be Anton, I didn't think I was Anton is what I meant to say, is because Anton is way too grumpy and I am not that grumpy. Even though I'm a reviewer, yes. And when he turned out to be a good guy, yes, I definitely would see myself as Anton. But the whole rest of the movie, I don't relate to at all.
Max, from what I've seen of your reviews, you try to remain positive when it comes to things. And I feel like Anton Ego thrives in negativity, except for that one moment of change in Ratatouille.
Yeah. And I agree. And again, I just watched Coco for the first time. I'll just say my thoughts. I really love the movie. Again, I rewatched the Pixar movies out of the past couple weeks, and I cried once. I normally don't cry in movies. I cried watching Toy Story 3 again, even though I knew everything was going to happen. I cried at the end. But the closest I got to crying, and I was tearing up, was when Coco was singing Remember Me with Miguel at the end of the movie. That hit me so hard. I think the last 10 minutes of Coco might be the best last 10 minutes of any Pixar movie. And I think I want to do a list of Joe possibly that I've been doing like Pixar heroes or good guys, because there's so many we can do. But for me, Hector was my favorite character of that whole movie. I think Hector I related to the most, a character who was wrongfully accused of, just dying, but being forgotten. Like, you really understand his character. And I was so happy he got his satisfying ending. But it's my number 11. And I watched Incredibles 2 last night. Loved it to death, other than the villain. So I flipped Onward. So now Onward's at number 13, Incredibles 2 is at number 12, and I have Coco at 11.
Max, as much as I love The Incredibles, you're putting Onward criminally low.
No, I don't think I even Onward's low, but because I didn't feel I didn't feel like I was gonna for Incredibles 2, I was laughing my ass off the whole time. Like the flip reversal of Bob and Elastigirl, Mr. Incredible is picture perfect, and Jack having powers all of a sudden is great. Dash is one of my favorite Pixar characters. And the score is like the best. Onward for me misses a really good Pixar score, in my opinion. The song "Remember Me" is so good. That song. I mean, again, I didn't know anything about the. I knew what was gonna. I didn't know what was gonna happen in the movie when I watched it, but man, I did think though the movie itself did feel familiar. I feel like we've seen that type of movie before. And that type of twist before, where the person you look up to the most actually turns out to be the villain, which is what Up and Coco have in similarity. But I think Coco, in my opinion, is a much better movie than Up, in my opinion. I think Coco mixes in the funness of what music is, and that's with reality and death. Up has, as I said, the best opening of all time. But for me, it doesn't really mix tones. It gets super silly, and then it goes back to being super serious. It goes from, the bird and Doug having conversations to Carl talking to the house again and being emotional. I just think the tones don't always work in Up. Harvard said, thoughts on Evelyn from Incredibles 2. Evelyn is Screenslaver, who we turned out to be, Evelyn Dever, who I literally just
Evelyn Dever? You mean Evil Endeavor?
Yeah, of course.
The most obvious twist villain of all time?
Yeah. Incredibles 2 could have been the best Pixar movie if the villain was Evelyn's brother. I don't think so. I think what's really fascinating that I really forgot about Incredibles 2 is that the motive of those villains is that their dad put his life there's a break-in into their house, and instead of hiding or running away, their dad called superheroes, and the superheroes didn't pick up. That was an amazing plot line that no one really talks about, that superheroes became illegal, and what happened? People lost complete faith in them to a point of risking their lives just to call them. But now I think the brother was kind of blind to all of that because he just loved superheroes as a kid, while she was way more in reality about it.
Well, I would disagree. I think their split in perspective is really well done, because the brother is right. Is that if their father called the superheroes and the superheroes weren't outlawed, then they would have been there.
Correct.
But the sister Evelyn is right in that if they hadn't even tried to call the superheroes, then nothing bad would have happened. I remember being in Incredibles 2 and watching Evelyn and Elastigirl interact, and I wanted so badly for Evelyn to not be the villain. I thought that would be a more interesting twist.
Yeah,
would be that Evelyn is not the villain. I can't remember who I wanted to be the villain, but
Underminer.
I mean,
honestly, he doesn't pose a good threat for sure.
I don't think revealing the Screenslaver's Underminer would have been a ridiculous twist. Maybe it could have been great. Yeah. But switching it to Winston, I don't feel like works, because
Winston was also just such a positive guy, and his belief in the superheroes was real in his life. Like, while he was a business guy, you could tell that he really wasn't when he was interacting with the superheroes. He was just he believes in the superheroes.
I think the idea that Winston would be the bad guy is that if he's using the Screenslaver in order to facilitate superheroes to come back into the public, which is one idea, but then the Screenslaver, who's trying to make like a more interesting point about screens and being a slave to media, it's a little too much. But I honestly, it's not in my top 10 Pixar movies, but I think Incredibles 2 is an incredible superheroes movie. I just, compared to other Pixar movies, it's a little,
I just love that movie. Chilling says the tone in Up is all over the place. Up is my number 16. I mean, I have 22. It's low for me. Like, I think Up is a brilliant movie when it knows what it is, an emotional movie talking about Carl and his wife. When it goes off the rail, and Russell too. Russell actually has a good emotion in it too. I just think the movie doesn't balance its seriousness and its ridiculousness at all. I think it goes a little all over the place.
I've heard a theory about Up, which I thought about when I watched it again recently. Which is very interesting, which is that the entire movie is Carl's journey to the afterlife, which is a very interesting lens to view the movie through. I don't totally buy it, but I think the elements of it being silly, I don't have as much of a problem with because, it's connecting to their childhood desire to be explorers. So having that exemplified in, the literal dogfight in the sky, I didn't have much of a problem with that. I think, I love Doug. So even if it doesn't totally work with the clashing tones, I think the humor is still funny and the emotions are still palpable. So it doesn't bring Up down too low. Granted, it's not in my top 5. I forget where it is actually in my
Up.
Let's see if I can. As this is going to take.
I think WALL-E is the most overrated Pixar film. I think Up isn't spectacular as people think it is as well.
I have Up at number 9.
Oh, okay. So
I'm not the most outspoken defender of Up, but I think it's not. I think it's still really good. And objectively, I knew what the first time I watched it, I knew what the montage was going to be, and I still felt it.
I feel it every time. There's no doubt about it. But as well, that's why I struggle with Months, because Months goes from being this explorer to basically like killing kids. Like he's throwing Russell off. Like he went from a nice guy who's a researcher, and I get why he's desperate, but it kind of strained credibility. Like Ernesto de la Cruz, it made sense because he at least killed someone before he threw Miguel off the roof. But Months, it didn't make any sense to me why he was even thinking about killing a kid.
Well, I think there's a part of Up which is maybe glossed over a little too much, which is other people came looking for the bird. So I understood that, which is that he's friendly to Carl and Russell when they first arrive, but the moment he thinks that they're going to interfere with his lifelong dream, that's when he gets crazy, insane, sending his dogs to kill them.
Yeah. But it's a fair point. We are over time here. Unless you guys have any lasting questions for us, if that is it, then we're going to call it a day. So if you're watching this live, thank you so much. If you haven't hit that like button yet, that's the best way to support this YouTube channel, is to hit that like button. Once this video goes up, let us know in the comment section down below. What do you want us to talk about in future videos? We've been sticking with Pixar and MCU for a while. I think I might want to do Pixar Heroes next week, possibly, if Joe is available. Yeah. But we can do other things. We haven't done Mission Impossible yet. We haven't done a lot. We haven't done like DC yet in general. We haven't done X-Men yet. There's a lot we can talk about. But please, guys, hit that like button. Share this video. If anyone likes Pixar Villains, share them with your family members, share them with your friends. That's the best way to help support this YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for joining us. That was Joe Baldwin. I am Max Stenberg. Thank you.